Hello, my name is Andy Haddix, and I am enrolled in the Liberty University's Distance Learning Program for my Master's in Human Services. One of the courses we are required to take is Human Services 508, and our last project is an interpersonal communication project, which I am going to present to you today. The very first slide, if you open up my PowerPoint presentation, is just the introduction. It says Interpersonal Communication Project, presented by myself, Andrea Haddix, Human Services 508 for Liberty University. I just wanted to quickly introduce the books that we used in this course. We had the very first book that we read all the way through was the Mel's Carbonell book, where we did our Uniquely You assessments and kind of figured out our behavioral blends individually. We also had the Burley Allen book, Listening the Forgotten Skill, the John Stewart book, Bridges Not Walls, and then also James Peterson, Why Don't We Listen Better? Another cool thing we got to do was watch the Fireproof DVD, and we had 1 week on this, which was a really cool book about communicating effectively within relationships. Going on to the next slide, the introduction, it says, during the course of studies in Human Services 508, students were challenged to define an overachieving goal for his or her life. By defining an overachieving goal, one is able to determine personal strengths, weaknesses, and how one can enlarge conversations within their interpersonal arena. Going on to the next slide, you will see that the identification of my overachieving goal is to become a level 1 or master listener. I want to be able to effectively communicate with all people, and in order to do so, I need to really fine-tune my listening skills and become a level 1 listener. Because of my individual behavioral blend, I tend to shy away or not speak open in public discussions. Sometimes this allows people to view me as being unapproachable, when really I am probably one of the most approachable people. I accept everybody and I like to listen to everyone's stories, but since I'm shy, I'm kind of an introvert, I'm viewed as unapproachable. I then become very frustrated with the way people conduct their businesses or individual relationships, and I really have I shouldn't be judging in that sense. I didn't do anything to help it. So by accomplishing this goal, by becoming a level 1 listener, I will be able to actively listen and engage in conversations in my professional life and also in my personal life. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that a level 1 listener, I want to be able to make meaningful connections with others. And in order to do so, I need to grasp all these concepts that I'm about to present to you. I need others to feel valued by how I listen to them speak. I want them to know that I'm actively engaged in the conversation. I want others to feel respected by how I listen to them. I want to listen from a non-judgmental point of view. I want to create a safe environment for others to use and to feel. I want those talking to me to feel that their thoughts are validated by my listening skills. And I also want others to want to talk to me. I want them to feel very safe and comfortable in speaking with me. Moving on to the next slide, you will see that I have defined communication by kind of the 2 main books that we use throughout the course. Communication, as defined by John Stewart, is just kind of like the all-encompassing. It talks about how you have to grasp all concepts to effectively communicate with other people. It's the continuous, complex, collaborative process in listening and communication. Burley Allen really stresses communication as being a listening. Like, if you can listen well, why don't we listen better, then your communication will obviously improve. Moving on to the next slide. Inhaling, as defined by John Stewart. Inhaling is the perception of inhaling, is that it is an active, not a passive process, and this is true. You're constantly intaking, constantly inhaling information, and how you process it really determines how you're going to exhale it. Inhaling combines the 2 active interpretive processes of perceiving and listening. So you're doing 2 things at once. You're perceiving the information, but you're also listening to what somebody is saying. And inhaling, Stewart states that a good listener can be defined as one who is mindful of the side spectrum of listening skills that include accurate receiving, retaining attention, sustaining attention, and attending to your own speech and encouraging the person you are listening to continue communicating with you. Moving on to the next slide, we'll talk about exhaling, and this is also defined by John Stewart. And there are several steps to exhaling, but 2 of the main points that I wanted to bring up were self-disclosure and self-presentation. Self-disclosure in the sense that it can be a very positive thing or it can be a very negative thing in how you exhale to people. Sometimes people self-disclose way too much information, and you're kind of sitting there thinking like, oh my goodness, that was a lot to take in. So if you can really think about how much information you need to self-disclose, and you do it in a pertinent way, then you are creating a sense of trust and a camaraderie in a relationship. There's also self-presentation, and that's the desire to have others perceive us as we genuinely perceive ourselves. How do you look at yourself? How do you view yourself? You want others to view you in that same sense. Moving on to the next slide, enlarging the conversation. The goal of enlarging the conversation is to understand the strengths and weaknesses we possess and use to develop effective communication skills. And when an individual demonstrates enlarging the conversation, they avoid barriers and further the conversation with those that they're trying to maintain and build relationships with. The next slide talks about interpersonal communication. And according to Stewart, interpersonal communication is a subset of communication in general. This means the collaboration, choices, culture, identities, conversation, and nexting, which are all parts of interpersonal communicating. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that I talked a little bit about the Uniquely You assessment. This was from the very first book that we read in this course, the Mills Carbonell book, and we were able to really define our behavioral blend by taking a series of tests. My personal behavioral blend was pretty much spot on. It was very accurate. I expect people to view me as submissive and competent, but I can also be very passive. People expect me to be more shy than outgoing. I prefer to work behind the scenes, and I am very loyal and friendly to people. People consider me a good listener and non-confrontational, but since I tend to be more reserved in public and in big group situations, I am perceived as unapproachable. And like I said before, I definitely consider all these conclusions for the Uniquely You assessment to be very accurate. Moving on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about self-awareness. And self-awareness is key to developing better communication and eliminating my own personal barriers. I want to be an effective listener. I want people to want to come talk to me and to feel safe with me. And in order to do so, I need to really kind of break down those barriers. I need to be considered more approachable, and I want people to feel like that they can come to me and talk to me and feel very safe and secure with me. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that I talked about potential barriers to effectively communicating. And those would be biased listening, which means that your brain is already, as you're listening, you're not really listening because you're already forming opinions and judgments. The next one would be nonverbal cues, crossing your arms, not maintaining eye contact. Something else would be becoming defensive right away. You're listening and like immediately your brain is going to defense mode. And then the flat brain syndrome is something that we spoke and we discussed from James Peterson's text, and that's when your brain is pretty much on information overload and you kind of just like flatline. You don't have anything that's coming in or out, and you're not able to fully grasp and maintain concepts and to really effectively communicate with other people. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that we I spoke about solutions to noise pollution, internal and external. So you really want to display positive nonverbal cues. You want to nod your head. You want to actively listen and display cues that you are listening to others. Maintaining eye contact with people, that's so important. I make my daughters do that with me all the time. Empathetic listening, you're empathetic. You want to listen to them. You want to feel for them. Clarifying the information that is being presented to you. So paraphrasing it back to people, saying, you know what, I wasn't quite understand what you said to me about this. Can you expand upon that, please? And then another thing, which I had mentioned before, that can be a positive or negative, is just avoiding too much self-disclosure, but still having enough self-disclosure so that you're able to form relationships and build trust with other people. Moving on to the next slide, my action plan. In order to become a level 1 listener, I need to be approachable, I need to be less judgmental, I need to listen without defending, and I need to provide the person communicating with me a safe place to do so. I am guilty of all of those things, and I need to make sure that in order to achieve my goal, I need to accomplish those tasks. And then the next few things, you'll see that I presented a few journal articles that spoke about different problems with communication, one of which being talking about how second language learners could benefit greatly from having a communications course where they can learn to effectively communicate and listen, which I think would be beneficial to all students of all ages. As a teacher, that would be great. And then the second article that I presented was one about how several studies indicate how there is a huge barrier in communication with physicians and nurses, and how important is it that our doctors and nurses communicate effectively. So I feel like that is a big topic that needs to be approached so that we can feel comfortable with our medical care. And the very last slide is just my references. So, and I believe that is it. Thank you so much for this course. I did enjoy it, and I hope that everyone that watches it has a great day.